Happy belated Valentine's Day, everybody. Mike from Southern California, and today is Friday, February the 14th, 2020, and you're on the mic. First up, I'd like to apologize. I know this. I was going to make this a Valentine's Day special edition. However, due to circumstances beyond my control, I was not able to record this until now, which is right now 8:02 Pacific Standard Time. Still today, throughout the state here, obviously, barely though. um, yeah. So on this episode, what I was planning on talking about is, of course, with it being Valentine's Day, I want to look back at some of the classic couples that we grew up with, throughout the different niches through anime, comics, cartoons, and pro wrestling, those areas that I cover. So without no further ado, let's start going here. So I'm gonna kind of combine the comics and cartoon part of it because many of the cartoons that we grew up with, well, of course, the same with anime and manga. The relationship is somewhat the same with anime and manga as well. Basically, you know, no, in our case though, some of the cartoons actually spawned the comics, and in other cases, the comics spawned the cartoons. So, with that being said, let's look at some of the couples that look at some of the relationships over the years and stuff. Going back, of course, one of the first ones that comes to mind is Popeye and Olive Oil. You know, um, you know, in many of the now granted, initially Olive Oil was introduced a little into it a little bit, but as everybody knows, Popeye and Olive Oil did love each other, and oftentimes the plot lines would end up in the damsel in distress um, storyline, and usually what would happen a lot of times is you know Olive Oil would find would even though she loved Popeye, there's always something that came up that sparked her interest or piqued her interest to where she wanted Popeye to somehow end up making certain changes. Like, one I think in one case it was like, oh, don't be so violent, let's say, you know. So Popeye, in trying to appease Olive Oil, would try to be what she was wanting to be, that particular episode or whatever piqued her interest at that point. You'd go, you'd see Popeye trying, and then of course Bluto would come along and see an opportunity to try to steal Oliver. Well, if I can be a better whatever than Popeye is, I can steal Olive away. And then usually what would end up happening is like Bluto would take it a little too far. He'd try to force him, now obviously even in cartoons back in the 30s and stuff you never really saw it was still fairly censored as compared to some of the stuff you see today. Okay, still fairly censored at the time, at least on relational, intimacy, relational matters. Okay. um so when I say that Bluto kind of forces it, I don't mean it in the way most people think it comes off in today's meaning of forcing yourself on somebody. I'm talking about like he really would do things to like he would end up putting Olive in like a kind of a damsel in distress kind of thing, and like kind of like, yeah, you're my girl now, it's kind of thing. And you know which would then call for Bluto and Popeye to get into a big fight. Bluto would take the advantage until Popeye, of course, ate his spinach, and for the most part, and then would come back and beat up Bluto, and then you'd have the end with Olive Oil, you know, you know, with them, kissing, with olive oil kissing him, you see his face all go all like red and stuff. Again, very simplistic because a lot of the Popeye cartoons of those times were fairly short. The originals, the Fleischer Studios, were shorts that were used by the movie theaters to kind of set up for whatever movie you happen to be watching. And later, of course, Famous Studios in Technicolor came out, and produced a bunch of Popeye cartoons as well. And then, of course, in the '80s, we got the Popeye and Son, where we see that Popeye and Olive Oyl did get married and even had a son. And for those of you who were watching cartoons back in the late '80s, you might remember Popeye Jr. as it was. He'd eat the spinach and then go, yeah, but he'd still have the same physical change of like sitting there and instantly becoming strong enough and beating up anybody who would, and of course, the late Robin Williams also starred in the live action version of Popeye, a movie that came out, I believe, in 1980. Um, so there's one example. Another example, from a comic cartoon, of course, are the Flintstones. Now, in this case, the Flintstones was originally a cartoon, but as with there were a couple of publishers out. I think Gold Key was one of them, where Gold Key would take some of the popular TV shows of the '60s and '70s and turn them into comics. I think Flintstones is one of those that they did it with. Um, but when you look at the relationship between Fred and Wilma, you know, now many people would compare the Flintstones to basically being the animated version of the Honeymooners at the time. The Honeymooners was kind of a sitcom that was out a few years before the Flintstones. I think in the late '50s, starred Jackie Gleason and Audrey Meadows. Um, the famous line Jackie Gleason would often cite is, "One of these days, Alice, one of these days, boom to the moon." You know. Now, of course, today, whether it's Jackie Gleason or Fred Flintstone, today you'd have people on, why would they put up with that? Well, Fred and Wilma did love each other. Okay. Now, Fred never threatened Wilma, nor did he ever, physically harm her. And he took a lot. And yeah, granted, many of you who probably grew up watching the Flintstones know that Fred was a very loud, boisterous individual. Wilma, and being a caveman, he's kind of big and burly. Barney a little shorter, but you also could tell Barney and Betty also loved each other. Barney was obviously, I'd say, almost the exact, whereas Fred was very loud and boisterous and quick to anger. Barney was a little bit, you know, obviously shorter, probably, well, he wasn't like skinny, but he was like wasn't as big as Fred, and he was obviously more even tempered, but in both cases, Fred and Wilma and Barney and Betty, they loved Fred and Wilma loved each other. Barney and Betty loved each other. The Flintstones and the Rubbles. You know, um, and Fred took a considerable amount of garbage to basically in which like Wilma's own mother, Pearl Schlaghoopel, never liked him and would always give him a hard time. you know, and we'd see on a number of occasions where she would actually beat up Fred. Pearl Schlagogel was a pretty big woman in her own right and wouldn't take no guff from nobody. And including Fred, including her own son-in-law. You know, um, and also around this time, many of you also remember the Jetsons, George and Jane Jetson. They also loved each other. George was, I think, the exact opposite of Fred. He was like more meek, but when it came to his family, he really did love them. Even though there were times he had, whereas Fred was very loud and boisterous, and Wilma at times had to kind of coax him to do things. Like if any of you've ever seen any of the Flintstone Christmas specials, where there were times Fred did not want to be Santa Claus because he was, overly concerned that people were just, yeah, Fred's a perfect Santa because he's fat, and so Wilma would have to kind of coax him at times to do it, but then you see George, when you look at George and Jane Jetson, they also loved their family. George loved his wife, he loved his family, went to work every day. Granted, I know that and looking back on how people in the '60s thought we would be at this point now in the 2000s, like, believe it or for those of you who probably never seen the Jetsons or whatever, back when the Jetsons was originally made, back in like the '60s, they believed we'd be flying around in hover cars by now, and like there'd be those sky high apartments. Obviously that didn't happen, but you obviously saw signs where George, now he's not the same as Fred. He's a bit more meeker, so Jane, Jane at times could manipulate him too. But they truly did. A lot of these couples did love each other, and over time. Let's see, looking at some of the comics, you know, also had like Archie, also had Archie and his crew, like Archie and Betty and Reggie and Veronica. They had, you had Archie and Betty were boyfriend and girlfriend. Reggie and Veronica were boyfriend and girlfriend. But you also had the case where there was some cross situation going. But you go onto those and you see how if you read the comics or saw some of the cartoons over the time, there'd be a lot of a lot of teen dating stuff. They'd be going to have fun at like go out to the movies, go out to the skating rink. You know, the girls would oftentimes be the cheerleaders, and the boys would be the sports stars. This, that, and the next thing. Um, some other examples from comics. Of course, Superman and Lois Lane probably from the superhero genre, one of the most classic couples in history. Granted, the nature of the relationship would change over time. During the golden age, they eventually did get married, and when after Crisis on Infinite Earths, when the Earth 2 Superman and Lois Lane were were sent to that pocket universe, they were at that time they were married. Um, you know, but and you saw kind of the distinct difference between how Lois would interact with Superman, how she'd interact with Clark. You know, until one day she eventually did find out. You had in all continuities where Lois was always trying to figure out his secret identity and all that. So, but in of course in the golden age we only know really more or less of Superman's adult life. We kind of hear like he we the mythos of him coming from another planet has always been part of his mythos. But during the golden age, of course, we didn't see him growing up in high school. But then in the Silver Age, we were introduced to the idea of him having a career as Superboy, his powers developing almost from birth, whereas before they were developing. And he had many, over the years, Superman had many love interests that would keep coming back into his life. Lana Lang in high school, Lori Lamaris in during his college years, and then Lois Lane in his adult life. And in fact, there was even a comic devoted to more or less it was focusing more on Lois's side of it than Super, but their romantic foibles, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, you know, but we'd oftentimes see, Lois did have a genuine interest in Superman throughout all this time. Maybe not in Clark till she found out who Clark was in the golden age. But you know, obviously another example of a now this is more golden age than silver age because as I understand it, this didn't happen as much as silver age. During the golden age, the one aspect the aspects we do know is that Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor were also you know um, for those of you who don't remember Wonder Woman's original story, because I know it's probably changed throughout, Silver Age but in the original Golden Age era, the Earth 2 era, um, Steve Trevor was a Navy pilot for the United States. Crash lands on Paradise Island, an island full of women, full of Amazons. You know, while she is nursing Steve back to health, you know, they, she falls in love with him, and then basically, I think it was Athena had said, that he must go back to America, and then they ended up having the tournament to see who would escort him back. The winner of that tournament would go back with him to represent the Amazons in the real world and fight off the evil of the time of like World War II and man's craving for war and all that. And as we find out later, Diana, who was born of clay and endowed with many of the magics, um, was basically considered Hippolyta's daughter, and Hippolyta did not want her to participate, so she ended up going in under a mask. You know, she would then, of course, escort Steve back. She won the tournament under a mask. She basically had to let her daughter go because it was ordained that whoever won the tournament would become Wonder Woman and escort Steve back. And then and then what had happened was that when she got to the States, she met a lady by the name of Diana Prince, who was a nurse, and she would basically, in essence, buy her name, basically buy the lady's name, so that she could then, you know, um, be closer to be closer to Steve. And you'd find kind of the reverse idea, the damsel in distress idea, the other way, where Steve would often be captured and Wonder Woman would save him. And but there was again more, you hear about all these couples throughout time and all that. Um, let's see. What are some so in Marvel as well, right? Marvel Comics. We all know of the story. We all know of Reed Richards and Susan Storm would eventually become husband and wife, and she'd be like his assistant. Johnny Storm, younger brother, the Human Torch, and Ben Grimm, the test pilot, and all that. They would and when they gained their superpowers through that meteor storm, they'd go on to they'd go on to battle villains like Galactus and Doctor Doom and all that. So we've seen it in cartoons. We've seen it in a lot of places. Also, when you look at anime, let's look at some of the anime couples. One of the first ones that come into mind right now because I've been watching it of late is in Lupin the Third, Lupin and Fujiko. There's kind of interesting dynamic there. Granted, they're more of a dating couple. They're not married, obviously, but but there's been signs there shown too that Lupin really does love Fujiko, but he's also a slave to his own human desires of want he can be suckered in at times, but and I think Fujiko on some level loves him too. But again, the greed in part gets in their way. some other other famous couples out there. I'm reminded of Yusuke Urameshi and Keiko Yukimura from Yu Yu Hakusho. I mean, think about this: the person that now in this case we are talking about two teenagers. The guy, of course, not wanting to admit that he likes her, but deep down he really does. He does like and care for her and wants to protect her, and she ends up being his lifeline. For those of you who may not remember, Yusuke was at one point killed and then brought back to life. And the one connection to the living world that was able to allow him to return to life was Keiko Yukimura. Um, I know of another anime series that covers a romantic relationship called Meizan Ikoku, which had about a what they call a ronin, which was in that case a college, basically somebody trying to get into college. They graduated high school. They were, they'd go to cram school to try to get into like university and all that. Um, his name was Yusaku Godai, and then he was living at this kind of rundown apartment where in the beginning of the series he was about ready to move out of the apartment. He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm out of here. And then the woman who would eventually become his wife moves in as the manager, Kyoko Otonashi. The whole 96 episode anime is about the building of their relationship. She's a little, he's like about 20, he's about 19, 20, 21 in the series. She's a couple years older than him. Well, more like 4 years older than him. So 23, 24, 25. I think by the time they get married, he's 21, she's 25. So she's older. She's also been a widow. She has been a widow, and as the series progresses, that they do, have kind of an issue there where she still has not really completely let go of her husband, and then he has to help her with that. Just a lot of the romantic foibles. After he eventually gets into college, graduates college, and goes on to his dream career, being a teacher, and then some issues, come up with the idea, just there's a lot of interesting romantic aspects played there, and different people getting involved and stuff. So yeah, and then of course in professional wrestling, we've had over the years, some very interesting, like okay, the story of Macho Man and Elizabeth. Now, granted, that story still ended up with them divorcing, but I think everybody remembers, back in '92 when even though they were married long before that, but they'd have a marriage ceremony in '92, for them to be married. Many of you also probably remember, I think it was a primetime wrestling episode where Uncle Elmer got married on national TV as well. You hear stories of that. See, um, trying to think of some other. Also trying to think of some happier stories because I know. Well, of course, Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy. They So I think back in ECW, Beulah was originally a valet for Raven, but then it was discovered that was Tommy, had ended up sleeping with her, and that was what caused the feud between Raven and Tommy Dreamer. And then it would, eventually, Beulah McGillicuddy would eventually retire after, basically at some point. Eventually, what ended up happening is Tommy and Beulah got married, and then Beulah would retire from wrestling to focus on family life. They eventually have kids and stuff like that. And there's another story. There's another like romantic story there. We've seen you know there's a lot of interesting tales when you look at the romances in each culture. So with that, I am I think I shall move on now because I really spent quite a bit of time talking about some of the different couples out there and how they came about and stuff. So let's remember this day, this Valentine's Day 2020, and let's take a look at what some of the stuff that's happened on other years on this date. So on this date, on Valentine's Day, back in 1940, that's 80 years ago, Fawcett Comics released on newsstands the first edition of Master Comics. Now, at the time, of course, the lead hero was Masterman, and some of the other heroes would one of the other heroes is Devil's Dagger, but it's kind of funny, even though the comic was named for this character, he would not last long. I think he only lasted like 7 episodes or 7 issues rather. Master Comics would eventually become the home for Captain Marvel Jr., Bullet Man, and Minuteman for Fawcett. Um, so on this date in 1940, the first edition of Master Comics would be released go on newsstands by Fawcett Publishing. So then we move ahead to this date on in 2000 on this date in 2008. Media Blasters would license on this date in 2008. Um, Media Blasters would license the anime Nighthead Genesis, which was an anime based on a TV drama called Nighthead. So the anime so on this date in 2008, Media Blasters would license Nighthead Genesis, which would uh, which would premiere in the United States on Toku on December 31st, 2015. And I guess from Nighthead Genesis, so here's at least the first paragraph on talking about the plot. It is said that 70% of the human brain um, capacity is unused. If humans possess incredible power, it is strongly believed to be lying dormant within this region. The unused 70% brain capacity is known as Nighthead. Okay, so basically, but anyways, on this date in 2008 was the licensing by Media Blasters for Nighthead Genesis, a basically an anime adaptation of a 1992 Japanese TV drama called Nighthead. And finally, we come 2 years after that to then on this date in 2010. From the TNA Impact Zone in Orlando, Florida, TNA Nonstop Action would put on the pay-per-view Against All Odds. The main storyline here is that Against All Odds is primarily, they had a couple other matches too, but it was basically the main the main focus of the show was the 8-card stud tournament that took place to determine the number one contender to the TNA World Heavyweight Championship to get their title shot at Lockdown. The winner of that tournament was D'Angelo Dinero, um, and the majority of the matches were were tournament matches. There were, I think, a couple. Yeah. So in there were two other matches aside from the tournament matches. One was a battle between Team 3D and the Nasty Boys, in which the Nasty Boys had beat Team 3D, and then in the other one of the other match aside from the tournament was AJ Styles with coming out with Ric Flair, retaining his title in a defense against Samoa Joe. So on this date in 2010, TNA put on the pay-per-view Against All Odds, which featured the 8-card stud tournament. So with that being said, if you guys want to check the links below, you can check the links below. You can with that if you want to contact me directly, you can check out my Discord. You can join the Discord if you'd like and DM me there directly. As you also know, I'm promoting a bunch of different dub companies because Funimation is not the only game in town. I'm also still promoting the GoFundMe's. If you guys would like to, always remember, guys, never feel like you have to donate. Nobody would want to see you go bankrupt over it. If you have the means to, and it's on your heart to do so, please consider donating. If you have already donated, please consider donating again. And if you cannot donate, you can still help out the cause by sharing the link. Because after all, sharing is caring. You never know. It doesn't hurt to ask. In that, maybe you have a friend who might be interested in checking out in helping out the cause. It doesn't hurt to ask. And if you like this content, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Um, I usually will get back to you. I usually will reply as soon as I find out when you guys comment. So, most of the time I will comment back. As long as you keep it civil and respectful, I usually, we don't need to be getting nasty with each other in the conversations. Keep it civil and respectful. I usually do reply back. Sometimes I may only be able to just like or share it or like the comment at the time. Unless I just don't feel I have anything more to say on what was said. But um, I always look forward to the conversations with you guys. So hope you guys will continue to watch the videos and stuff like that. And with that, I will see you guys on Monday. I hope I hope you had a good Valentine's Day today for all those couples out there, and I hope you know to both parties, guys and girls, you know just remind each other that how much you guys love each other. Okay, guys, be perfect gentlemen. Girls, be the lovely ladies in white. Anyways, I will see you all on Monday. Bye.